The entire courtroom froze the moment 17-year-old Aiden Brooks leaned back in his chair, looked Judge Frank Caprio straight in the eye, and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but a cocky, careless smirk wrapped in sound, followed by 5 words that sliced through the silence. "You can't do anything to me." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Reporters stopped writing. Officers tensed. His mother's pearls rattled against her chest. Aiden thought this was just another game his father's money would win for him. What he didn't know was that those 5 words were about to cost him far more than a ticket, and that millions of people would one day watch this moment in disbelief. Before we see how Judge Caprio answers that challenge, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss how justice truly works in this courtroom. Aiden Brooks hadn't always walked into rooms like he owned them, but by 17, entitlement fit him like a second skin. Growing up in the wealthy outskirts of Providence, he lived in a world where rules bent around him, where apologies were optional, and where consequences were nothing more than inconveniences his father's law firm could take care of. His parents, Jonathan and Melissa Brooks, sat in the front row of the courtroom earlier that morning, already rehearsing the same routine they'd perfected over the years. The mother's sympathetic sigh, the father's confident smirk, the whispered assurance that everything will be handled. But everything changed long before they stepped foot into Judge Caprio's courtroom. It began 2 days earlier, on a quiet suburban street that led to the entrance of Lincoln Elementary, just as the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the school zone. Aiden had spent the previous night with his friends, a group of equally privileged teenagers armed with luxury cars, expensive sneakers, and a dangerous sense of invincibility. They filmed everything, speeding, drifting, racing, uploading highlight reels to social media for clout. Views, likes, comments, those were the currency they truly believed in. One of his friends, Chase, had dared him. "Bet you won't floor it through the school zone tomorrow. 80 miles an hour. You do it. I'll buy you that new carbon fiber tennis racket." Aiden smirked, tapping the hood of his father's newest gift-a-matte black BMW M4. "Watch me." The next afternoon, with music blasting so loud the rearview mirror trembled, he cruised down Maple Street. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel in rhythm with the bass. He wasn't late. He wasn't stressed. He simply wanted the thrill and the proof. The speedometer climbed, 45, 55, 70, 85 km in a zone clearly marked 35 in bright yellow, right next to a sign with cartoon children holding hands. But street signs didn't matter to Aiden. He had spent years believing that life was one big hallway where doors opened automatically for him. At that exact moment, 62-year-old Linda Harper, a beloved crossing guard who had guided kids safely for more than a decade, stepped into the crosswalk holding up her handheld stop sign. Little Lily Dawson, 6 years old with pink shoes and a backpack covered in stickers, held on to Linda's hand. They were halfway across when Linda turned her head and saw headlights barreling toward them much too fast. Her instincts kicked in. She shoved Lily backward with all the strength her aging body could muster. Lily stumbled into her mother's arms on the sidewalk safe. But Linda fell hard, the impact sending a jolt of pain through her shoulder as her head struck the asphalt. Parents screamed. The whistle she'd been holding clattered across the pavement. Aiden's BMW shot past so close that the wind from it lifted Linda's vest. The brakes screeched late, far too late. The car swerved, then roared forward again as if nothing had happened. 2 police officers who witnessed the near tragedy jumped into their cruiser, blue and red lights flashing violently against the afternoon sun. Sirens erupted. Aiden glanced in the mirror, irritated, not scared, not guilty, just annoyed. He pressed harder on the gas, blowing past one red light, then a second. Horns blared. Drivers yelled. The chase lasted nearly half a mile before Aiden finally stopped, slamming the brakes with dramatic flair. When the officer approached, Aiden rolled his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" the officer demanded. Aiden scoffed, brushing invisible dust off his designer hoodie. Relax. My dad's firm will clean it up. I've got tennis practice. His words were captured clearly on body cam, cold, careless, dripping with privilege. He was arrested on the spot, though even in handcuffs, he smirked like someone confident the world still belonged to him. That same confidence followed him into the courtroom 2 days later until the moment Judge Caprio stepped inside. But before the judge arrived, the courtroom was already packed. Local reporters had gathered because the police report wasn't just routine. It hinted at something much bigger. Streaming crews from local TV stations positioned their cameras perfectly. Retired residents who often attended public hearings squeezed into the back rows, whispering to each other. Melissa Brooks, elegant as always, kept adjusting her pearl necklace, nervous habit she couldn't hide. Jonathan Brooks glanced down at his Rolex, as if the hands on the dial could reassure him that time, money, and influence still worked in his favor. Aiden strutted into the room moments later, sneaker soles squeaking against the polished floor. His hoodie remained up despite courtroom protocol, his headphones still hanging from one ear. He checked his phone as though answering a text was more important than facing a potential criminal charge. 2 teenagers in the gallery giggled, whispering they recognized him from TikTok. Aiden winked at them. The courtroom deputies exchanged glances. They'd seen trouble before, but the arrogance rolling off this kid was something else entirely. Then everything went quiet. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Frank Caprio, an icon of fairness, patience, and unshakable dignity, walked in. At 80 years old, he carried a presence that commanded respect effortlessly. His silver hair caught the courtroom lights, and his steady gaze swept the room like a warm but unwavering beam. When he sat, the courtroom breathed again. The clerk began. Case number 304771, the state of Rhode Island versus Aiden Brooks. Everyone waited for Aiden to rise, everyone except Aiden himself. He stayed slouched, thumbs still scrolling on his phone. Judge Caprio looked at him gently, almost fatherly. "Mr. Brooks, please stand and remove your hood." Aiden looked up slowly, revealing that smug half-smile he had perfected over years of getting away with everything. "Why?" he said, shrugging. "It's just a traffic ticket, old man." The room collectively gasped. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Jonathan Brooks stiffened. Officers shifted in their boots. Reporters' pens hovered mid-air. Even the court stenographer paused, unsure whether she had truly heard what she thought she heard. Judge Caprio did not flinch. He removed his glasses with a calmness that sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. Anyone familiar with him knew this was the moment where patience met its limit. Still, he spoke softly. "Mr. Brooks, I asked you to stand." Aiden rolled his eyes but stood, slouching dramatically. "Whatever. Can we get this over with? I've got places to be." Judge Caprio folded his hands. "It seems you believe this is a casual matter." Aiden shrugged again. "My dad can handle it. He handles everything." One of the deputies muttered under his breath. "Not today, kid." But Aiden didn't notice, or didn't care. He was too busy smirking, too busy believing that money, connections, and entitlement were shields strong enough to protect him from anything, even the law. He had no idea how wrong he was. And he had no idea just how far Judge Caprio was willing to go to teach him the lesson no one else ever had. The tension inside courtroom 6 thickened like fog as Aiden Brooks finally stood before. Judge Frank Caprio, though stood, was generous. He leaned lazily on one leg, slouched. Hood still halfway up, eyes darting around the room like he was bored out of his mind. The sound of cameras clicking punctuated the silence. Local reporters whispered to each other, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. But what really sent a chill through the room was the way Aiden carried himself. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't confused. He wasn't even pretending to respect where he was. He looked like a teenager waiting for his latte at a cafe, annoyed it was taking too long. Judge Caprio studied him for a long moment, his eyebrows lifting just slightly, as though This level of disrespect required a moment to process. He'd seen arrogance before. He'd seen entitlement. But rarely had he seen a teenager so convinced he was untouchable. "Mr. Brooks," the judge began, his voice steady, "you are charged with reckless driving, endangering a school zone, and failure to comply with officers. These are serious offenses." Aiden smirked. "You're acting like I killed someone." A murmur rippled through the gallery. A police officer clenched his jaw. A teacher seated in the back shifted uncomfortably. Judge Caprio didn't react outwardly. Instead, he raised one hand and gestured to the clerk. "Read the charges into the record." The clerk cleared his throat and began. On Wednesday, 3:12 p.m., the defendant, Aiden Brooks, was observed traveling at 85 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour school zone. Aiden sighed dramatically. Several spectators glared at him. Nearly struck crossing guard Linda Harper and a minor child, Lily Dawson. "That kid was fine," Aiden muttered under his breath. Melissa Brooks made a strangled sound, part gasp, part whimper. Jonathan shot his son a sharp, warning look, but Aiden didn't care. He hadn't cared since the moment he walked through the door. Ignored officer commands, proceeded through 2 red lights, and verbally dismissed the severity of the incident. The clerk sat down. The silence afterward was suffocating. Judge Caprio folded his hands again. "Mr. Brooks, do you understand the charges against you?" Aiden shrugged. "Sure. Reckless driving, blah blah. Can't we skip to the part where you give me community service or whatever? My dad's got a meeting at 11. Jonathan flinched. Melissa covered her face. One reporter whispered to another, "Is this kid trying to get himself buried alive?" Judge Caprio inhaled slowly through his nose. "Mr. Brooks, this is not a negotiation. This is a courtroom." "Yeah," Aiden said. "But you and I both know how this goes. You give me some hours, Dad hires someone to do them, and we're out." A collective gasp swept the room. Even people accustomed to courtroom drama stiffened at the sheer audacity. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change, but the air around him did. Something shifted. Something almost invisible yet powerful, like the tightening of a bowstring. He removed his glasses again, this time more slowly. He polished them with a folded handkerchief. A gesture so calm, so deliberate, it felt like the courthouse itself leaned in to listen. Finally, he said, "Mr. Brooks, please tell me exactly what you believe will happen today." Aiden lifted his chin. "I believe you can't do anything to me. My dad's firm runs this whole town. Everyone knows that." Gasps. Several. Loud ones. Jonathan Brooks turned beet red not from anger at the judge but embarrassment at his own son's stupidity. Melissa nearly fainted. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He simply placed his glasses on the bench, folded his hands, and looked directly at Aiden, with a weight that silenced the entire room. "You believe that because of your father's influence," he said quietly. "The law does not apply to you?" Aiden nodded, arms crossed, defiant. "Pretty much." The judge leaned back. It wasn't a retreat, it was preparation, like a general stepping back to observe the battlefield. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "in my 37 years on this bench, I've encountered defendants who were frightened, remorseful, furious, confused, misguided, and sometimes lost. But very few have had the confidence to announce that they are above the law." Aiden grinned. "Well, you said it, not me." A reporter's pen dropped to the floor. A deputy coughed to hide a laugh of disbelief. Judge Caprio's eyes hardened, not with anger, but disappointment. Deep, heavy disappointment. The kind that feels worse than fury. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "whether you realize it or not, what you've shown here today is not strength. It is not power. It is immaturity, recklessness, and a profound lack of understanding about the value of human life." Aiden scoffed. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." The judge leaned forward slightly. "A child could have died." That silenced even Aiden, though only for a moment. Then he rolled his eyes. But she didn't. It was the wrong thing to say. One of the officers in the back muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. Lily's mother, who'd come quietly to observe, covered her mouth and wiped tears. Judge Caprio exhaled slowly, then looked at the sheriff's deputy. "Bring in the evidence." The deputy wheeled in a large monitor. Aiden perked up, thinking this was some kind of joke. "Cool," he said. "Movie time." The deputy gave him a look that could freeze metal. The judge nodded. The monitor lit up. Aiden's BMW tore across the screen like a missile. The footage shook slightly from the force of its speed. Parents screamed, children scattered. Linda Harper's fluorescent vest flashed into frame as she grabbed Lily and flung her backward. The impact knocked Linda to the ground, her body twisting unnaturally as she hit the pavement. In the courtroom, someone cried out softly. The video continued. Officers sprinting, the BMW still speeding, brakes screeching too late. Then came the body cam audio. Aiden's voice rang through the speakers. "Relax. Man, my dad will make this disappear. I've got tennis practice." The room reacted like it had been punched. People shook their heads. Some looked away. Even Jonathan and Melissa couldn't defend it. Aiden stopped smirking. His jaw tightened. Judge Caprio let the video finish, then looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Mr. Brooks," he said softly, "do you recognize yourself in that footage?" Aiden swallowed, eyes flickering in discomfort. "That's not the whole story." "It is enough of it," the judge replied. "More than enough." The silence afterward was devastating. In that silence, the arrogance began to crack. Not shattered, not gone, but cracked just enough for something else to slip through. Fear. Real fear. Judge Caprio folded his hands again, his voice low but resonant. "You walked into this courtroom believing I could do nothing to you. But I assure you, Mr. Brooks, you're about to learn how justice truly works." And for the first time since entering the room, Aiden Brooks stopped smiling. The hush inside courtroom 6 was no longer tense curiosity. It had transformed into something heavier, something that pressed down on the room like a storm cloud before the lightning strikes. Even those who had walked in expecting a routine hearing now sat rigid, their eyes pinned to the drama unraveling between the arrogant teenager and the judge whose name carried weight far beyond the walls of Providence. Aiden Brooks shifted uncomfortably for the first time since stepping into the courtroom. The footage he'd just watched, himself speeding through a school zone, nearly killing a crossing guard and a little girl, played over and over in his mind like a loop he couldn't escape. And worse, the entire room had seen it. His parents, reporters, strangers, even a classmate who'd shown up out of curiosity. Judge Frank Caprio let the silence linger, as if allowing the weight of the footage to settle on every person present, most of all on the defendant standing before him. He finally spoke, voice low but strikingly clear. "Mr. Brooks, the evidence is unambiguous. These were not the actions of someone making a mistake. They were the actions of someone who believes the rules do not apply to him." Aiden didn't respond. His eyes darted toward his father, who sat frozen, jaw clenched so tight, a muscle twitched violently along his cheek. Melissa Brooks dabbed her eyes with a trembling handkerchief. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Not even close. He nodded to the deputy again. "Bring the second piece of evidence." Aiden frowned. "There's more." The judge didn't answer. A new video appeared on the screen, this one from a different camera angle, positioned higher, offering a clearer view of the sidewalk where the near tragedy unfolded. The footage began just seconds before the BMW came blasting through. This angle captured the full impact of the moment. Linda Harper's stop sign catching the sunlight, her arm raised, her posture steady and certain. Lily Dawson clutched a small stuffed rabbit in one hand, humming something quietly as they walked. Her pink backpack bounced with every step. Then blur. Aiden's car tore past, close enough to lift the corner of Linda's vest with the force of displaced air. Lily stumbled backward, wide-eyed. Linda fell sideways, her shoulders smashing against the curb. The video paused on Linda, lying crumpled on the pavement. A woman in the gallery let out a broken sob. Another covered her mouth. Cameras rolled silently, trembling slightly in the hands of stunned reporters. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Caprio said softly, "do you know what happened to Ms. Harper after this?" Aiden's voice cracked the tiniest bit. She's fine, right?" Judge Caprio shook his head. "Why don't we hear from the paramedics?" He clicked a button, and audio filled the courtroom. A paramedic's voice. "She's conscious but disoriented. Likely a concussion. Shoulder looks dislocated." Another voice. "Where's the child? Someone check on the child." In the background, Lily crying hysterically. A mother screaming her daughter's name, footsteps pounding, sirens approaching. Aiden flinched as if the sound physically struck him. When the audio stopped, Judge Caprio folded his hands and leaned back. "Ms. Harper spent 3 days in the hospital, Mr. Brooks. She suffered a dislocated shoulder, a concussion, and severe bruising along her ribs. She's 62 years old." The judge's voice softened, but his words hit harder. "And Lily?" Aiden swallowed. "She's alive," the judge continued, "but she wakes up screaming at night, convinced a car is chasing her. She refuses to walk to school now. Her mother drives her every day and waits outside the building until she's inside." Aiden's face lost its color. His shoulders sagged, his fingers curled inward, as if trying to grasp something that simply wasn't there. The entire courtroom watched him. They weren't looking at the smug teenager anymore. They were looking at a boy finally beginning to understand what he had almost done. But Judge Caprio wasn't done exposing the truth, not yet. He gestured to the bailiff. "Please bring in the third exhibit." A hush fell as a man entered carrying a stack of printed images. He handed them to the judge, who lifted the first one and displayed it to the court. A photograph of Linda Harper in the hospital bed arm in a sling, bruise running along her cheekbone, tubes running from her arm. She still wore her crossing guard vest, folded neatly on the bedside table. Another photo, Lily clinging to her father's shirt, her face buried in his chest, shoulders trembling. Another Linda attempting physical therapy, grimacing, clutching her injured shoulder. A gasp swept the courtroom. Aiden's eyes widened, then darted downward. He blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the silence again. "These are not simply images, Mr. Brooks. They are reminders. Reminders of the reality you almost created." Aiden's voice cracked. "I didn't mean—" "No," Judge Caprio said gently but firmly. "No one ever means to destroy a life, but the consequences are the same." The judge set the photos down, leaned forward, and spoke words that echoed against the marble walls. "You told this courtroom that I could not do anything to you. But what you fail to understand is that the law is not bound by your father's influence. Justice does not bend for wealth. Responsibility does not disappear because you find it inconvenient." Aiden's breathing grew shallow. He wrapped his arms around himself as though suddenly cold. "We have not even reviewed your driving history yet," the judge continued, "which brings me to the next point." He lifted a thin stack of papers from his bench. 3 prior incidents dismissed. 2 warnings ignored. 1 minor collision settled through your father's firm. And in each instance, Mr. Brooks, you were quoted as saying some variation of the phrase, "My dad will handle it." Melissa Brooks covered her face. Jonathan lowered his head into his hands. The judge's voice sharpened. "Your father may have shielded you from consequences in the past, but that shield ends today." Aiden opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His throat worked uselessly as he tried to find words. "For years," Judge Caprio said softly, "you have been taught that privilege can erase responsibility. Today, I must teach you it cannot." The judge paused, letting his words settle into Aiden's bones. Then slowly, he stood. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I am now prepared to present the potential maximum penalties for your actions." Dozens of heads snapped up, The room collectively held its breath. Aiden's knees nearly buckled. His world once built on arrogance, entitlement, and the belief that nothing could touch him had begun to crumble. And Judge Frank Caprio was just getting started. Judge Frank Caprio remained standing behind the bench, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood surface. He wasn't looming, he wasn't raising his voice, but somehow the room felt even smaller as he prepared to announce what could happen next. The cameras zoomed in. A reporter whispered, "This is it." Even the overhead lights seemed to hum more loudly, as though they too sensed the shift about to unfold. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Caprio began, "under Rhode Island law, the maximum penalties for the charges you face are as follows." Aiden swallowed hard. "For reckless driving in a school zone, up to 6 months in a juvenile detention facility." Gasps erupted from several corners of the room. Aiden's mother gripped the bench in front of her so tightly her knuckles whitened. His father visibly stiffened, attempting to mask the panic creeping into his eyes, but failing. "For endangerment of a minor," Caprio continued, "you could face an additional fine of up to $500, mandatory safety courses, and a driving suspension until age 25. The number hit Aiden like a physical blow. His eyes widened, lips parted slightly. "Additionally, your vehicle may be confiscated," the judge said, "and the proceeds from its sale can be directed toward the medical expenses of Ms. Harper, as well as funds to improve school zone safety." Aiden's breath hitched. He seemed to shrink a little, barely noticeable, but enough. His hoodie no longer made him look rebellious. Now it looked like armor that offered no protection. "Your actions," Judge Caprio said, "were not a mere lapse of judgment. They exhibited a pattern, one consistent with a young man who has never been required to take responsibility for anything." No one, not even Aiden, dared interrupt. "I must also mention the charge of fleeing from police officers," the judge added. "Evading law enforcement carries its own consequences." A faint, strangled sound escaped from Melissa Brooks. Jonathan reached for her hand, but even he looked lost, as though his lawyerly instincts had taken a blow he hadn't anticipated. Aiden's voice finally emerged, but it trembled. Your Honor, I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to." Caprio lifted a hand to stop him. "I do not want to hear excuses," he said gently. "If you wished to speak earlier, you had many opportunities." Aiden's shoulders sagged, defeated. The judge continued, "I am aware that you have lived a privileged life, Mr. Brooks, and I am also aware that you have been shielded from consequences through the actions of others. Your father's influence, your family's wealth, perhaps even the leniency of those who hoped you would someday learn on your own." He paused. But learning never occurred. A soft hum of agreement rippled across the gallery. Not malicious, but honest. Caprio reached for a file and opened it. "I have here transcripts from 3 previous cases involving you, Mr. Brooks. In each one, the phrase, 'no prior record,' was emphasized, and in each one, you were let go with a warning." Aiden looked down, his face burning with shame. "What you fail to understand," Caprio said, "is that privilege is not a shield, it is a test. And you, young man, have been failing that test." He set the file aside. "Therefore," the judge said, "I am prepared to sentence you to the maximum allowable by law." Aiden's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table so hard his fingers reddened. "No," Melissa whispered. "No, no, no." Jonathan stood abruptly. "Your Honor. Your Honor, if I may sit down, Mr. Brooks." Caprio's voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to push Jonathan back into his chair like a force of nature. The judge turned his attention back to Aiden. "Young man," he said, "this courtroom is not ruled by intimidation, influence, or fear. It is ruled by justice. And what you have shown today, your arrogance, your disregard for human life, your belief that you are untouchable, these things cannot go unanswered." Aiden swallowed, eyes glistening. "Please," he whispered. I can explain." The judge leaned forward. "Explain what?" That you didn't care that Ms. Harper lay on the ground injured? That your greatest concern after nearly killing a child was being late to tennis practice? That you believed your father's money could erase a near tragedy? Aiden flinched. Each question landed like a strike. "That's not who I want to be," Aiden said, the first genuine words he had spoken all day. Caprio studied him. His expression softened, but only slightly. "You had the opportunity to show remorse the moment you were arrested," he said quietly. "You had the opportunity when you walked into this courtroom. But instead, you mocked, you dismissed, you laughed." Aiden pressed a shaky hand to his forehead, as though trying to erase the memory of what he had been moments earlier. The judge inhaled deeply. "Mr. Brooks, actions have consequences." The words landed with such resonance that even the reporters lowered their pens. "I hereby sentence you," Caprio said, "to 120 days in the juvenile detention center, effective immediately." A sharp cry escaped Melissa Brooks. Aiden staggered back, as though the air had been punched out of him. "And," the judge continued, "your driver's license is suspended until your 25th birthday." Aiden's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Your vehicle will be seized," Caprio added, "and the proceeds from its sale will go directly to Ms. Harper's medical bills and to the city's school safety initiative." The courtroom trembled with murmurs. Some nodded approvingly. Others looked stunned. Aiden finally found his voice, though it shook violently. "Please, Your Honor." Please don't," Caprio raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "You have had every chance to take responsibility, every chance to show remorse, and yet all you have shown this court is contempt." He paused. "But," the courtroom froze. "But I believe justice also has room for compassion, when compassion has room to do good." Aiden lifted his head slowly, eyes filling with reluctant hope. "I'm not finished with you yet, Mr. Brooks," the judge said. "Not even close." Aiden wiped his face with a trembling hand. "What I decide next," Caprio continued, "may change the course of your life more profoundly than any punishment." The room fell into breathless silence again. "And before I reveal what that option is," the judge said firmly, "I want you to listen to something." He nodded to the clerk. A small envelope was brought forward and placed in the judge's hands. The handwriting on it was shaky, elderly, painstaking. Judge Caprio opened it carefully. "This," he said, "arrived in my chambers this morning." Then he read aloud. Aiden looked up, terrified and hopeful all at once. Whatever was in that letter would determine whether his life was about to descend into darkness, or whether the judge had something far more unexpected in store. Judge Frank Caprio unfolded the letter with the slow, deliberate care of a man handling something fragile, something sacred. The paper trembled ever so slightly between his fingers, not from uncertainty, but from the weight of what he was about to share. Aiden Brooks watched, frozen in place, his breathing shallow, his palms slick, his entire world hanging on the thin crease of a handwritten letter. "This," Judge Caprio said softly, "is from Ms. Linda Harper." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Melissa Brooks covered her mouth. Jonathan leaned forward, as though physically pulled by the gravity of the moment. Even reporters stopped recording for a heartbeat, stunned that the injured crossing guard had written directly to the judge. Aiden's pulse hammered in his ears. The judge began to read, "Your Honor, I'm writing to you not out of anger, but out of reflection. I have had time days in the hospital, hours awake at night to think about what happened, what that young man almost caused, what almost became the end of my life." Aiden winced. Judge Caprio continued, his voice steady, but carrying the emotional weight of every word. "I will not pretend I am not hurt. I am. My shoulder aches every morning. I still lose my balance sometimes when I stand. And I see the fear in Lily's eyes when cars pass too quickly." Aiden's jaw trembled. "But I also know what fear does. Fear makes people small. Fear turns young people reckless. Fear makes us forget that everyone, even foolish, arrogant boys, can change. A collective hush spread through the room. So I ask you, Your Honor, please show him mercy. Do not destroy his future. Give him the chance to become the man he has not yet learned to be. Aiden's breath caught violently. He blinked hard, swallowing a sob he had never expected to feel. I'll hold him accountable, yes. Make him understand the weight of what he did. But do not let this one terrible mistake define the rest of his life. If he is willing to change, then I am willing to forgive. The judge lowered the letter. A stunned silence filled the room, an almost sacred stillness. Aiden's shoulders shook. His arrogance, his armor hat cracked wide open. He wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, unable to speak. Judge Caprio folded the letter and set it gently on the bench, as though returning something delicate to its place. Mr. Brooks, he said quietly, you heard Ms. Harper's words. Words of mercy from a woman who had every reason to demand your punishment. Aiden nodded shakily. Do you understand the responsibility that mercy places upon you? Aiden tried to answer, but his voice broke. Finally, he managed a hoarse whisper. Yes, Your Honor. I do. But the judge wasn't done. Mercy, Caprio said, is not a gift. It is a burden. A calling. A test. And if granted, it becomes your duty to prove it was not misplaced. Aiden nodded rapidly, desperate, overcome. Judge Caprio straightened. I am prepared to offer you a choice. The room tensed. Aiden's breath hitched again. You may accept the maximum sentence I described earlier, the judge said, and spend the next 4 months in the juvenile detention center. Simple, final, clean. The words hung like a blade. Or, every head in the room tilted forward. You may choose an alternative sentence, one far more difficult. One that will change you more deeply than detention ever could. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Aiden's voice returned in a whisper. What is it? Judge Caprio rested both hands on the bench. For the next 12 months, Mr. Brooks, you will work no fewer than 20 hours a week at Providence Children's Hospital. Aiden blinked. The Children's Hospital? Yes. The judge leaned forward slightly. You will be assigned to the Trauma and Rehabilitation Unit. You will assist nurses, clean floors, deliver meals, wheel children to treatment rooms, sit with families during procedures, and you will see firsthand what reckless driving does to innocent people. Aiden swallowed hard. Furthermore, Caprio continued, you will attend monthly victim impact sessions. You will listen to survivors of accidents, some who have lost limbs, some who have lost loved ones. You will hear their stories. You will absorb their pain, and you will understand the consequences of choices like yours. Aiden's breathing quickened. Additionally, the judge said, for the first 3 months of your sentence, you will serve as an assistant crossing guard under the supervision of the department, rain or shine. You will guide children safely across streets, and you will remember every day exactly what you almost destroyed. Aiden felt dizzy, and, Caprio added, you will write 2 letters each month, one to Ms. Harper, one to Lily and her family. Aiden wiped his eyes again, voice trembling. What am I supposed to write? You will write what you've learned, Caprio replied, what you've witnessed, what you regret, how you're growing. And if you ever write a letter filled with excuses or arrogance or anything except genuine reflection, this alternative sentence will be revoked and you will serve the full detention term, plus additional penalties for contempt. Aiden nodded vigorously. Yes. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. But Caprio wasn't finished. You will not drive for the duration of the year. You will take the bus to the hospital, to the crossing guard post, to every appointment. You will feel the inconvenience you once dismissed. Aiden exhaled sharply, part fear, part relief. And as for your car, Caprio paused. It will still be seized and sold. The funds will still go to Ms. Harper's medical bills and to school safety improvements. Aiden nodded again, tears streaking his cheeks. And lastly, the judge said, Upon successful completion of this year, your driving privileges may be reconsidered when you turn 21, not 25. I make no guarantees. That depends entirely on you." A long, stunned silence followed. Then Judge Caprio asked, "Mr. Brooks, which path do you choose?" Aiden looked up. His voice shook, but there was something new in his expression, something raw, vulnerable, and painfully human. "I choose the hospital. I choose the work. I choose the hard path. I want to be better. I need to be better." The judge studied him for a long moment. "Wanting is a beginning," he said quietly. "Becoming is the journey." Aiden nodded through tears. Judge Caprio turned to the deputy. "Place Mr. Brooks in the custody of the volunteer coordinator from Providence Children's Hospital. His program begins today." The deputy stepped forward, but Aiden wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the judge. "Your Honor," he whispered. "Yes, Mr. Brooks?" I'm sorry." Judge Caprio's eyes softened, not with leniency, but with the kind of compassion that demands accountability. "Your apologies mean nothing today," he said gently, "but your actions in the months ahead may give them meaning." Aiden nodded once slowly, solemnly. The boy who had entered the courtroom laughing walked out with his head lowered, escorted toward a future he never expected and a lesson he had never imagined learning. Behind him, the courtroom exhaled, as though releasing a storm that had finally broken, and Judge Frank Caprio watched him go, believing, as he always had, that sometimes the hardest path is the one that saves a life, not ends it. The first day of Aiden Brooks's alternative sentence at Providence Children's Hospital was nothing like he expected and everything he feared. There was no warm welcome, no gentle orientation, no soft landing designed to ease privileged teenagers into responsibility. The hospital's volunteer coordinator, a stern woman named Rebecca Shaw, greeted him with a clipboard, a curt nod, and a single instruction: "Follow me." Aiden obeyed without a word. They walked through long, white halls where the sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air. Nurses hurried past with charts and medicine trays. Parents with exhausted eyes paced outside patient rooms. The muffled cry of a child drifted faintly from the trauma ward. Every sound felt sharper, heavier, so different from the carefree chatter of tennis practice or the thumping bass of Aiden's playlist. Rebecca led him to a supply closet. "You'll start here," she said. Aiden blinked. "Here?" "Yes. Every room in the trauma unit must be sanitized before the next patient is admitted. Floors, tables, equipment, everything. Here's your cart." She pointed to a bin stocked with gloves, disinfectant, cloths, and trash bags. Aiden stared at it. It looked like a janitorial cart, because it was. Rebecca didn't soften. "You want redemption? It starts with a mop." He nodded slowly, swallowing pride that suddenly felt like a stone lodged in his throat. His first assignment was Room 14A Trauma Bay, recently vacated by an 11-year-old boy recovering from a car accident. The moment Aiden stepped inside, he froze. The bed was stripped, but traces of what had occurred lingered. Smudges of blood on the side rail, a fallen stuffed dinosaur on the floor, a small shoe left beside the bed. Someone's pain lived in this room. Aiden's chest tightened. He reached down, picked up the dinosaur, and placed it gently on the counter. He put on gloves. Then quietly, awkwardly, he started to clean. It took him nearly 30 minutes to sanitize the space, a task that an experienced hospital worker might complete in 10. Sweat prickled his forehead. His arms ached. His back tensed. He wasn't used to labor that demanded attention to detail, consistency, humility. When he finished, Rebecca was at the door. "Not bad for a first try," she said. "Now do it again in room 18. Aiden pushed the cart forward, shoulders heavy, not from exhaustion but from realization. This wouldn't be a punishment he could slip past, like court-ordered community service someone else could fake for him. This would be work, real work, and work changes people. By the second week, the shock had worn off, replaced by something else, something Aiden didn't recognize at first. He was beginning to pay attention. To everything. He noticed how parents flinched whenever a doctor walked toward them unexpectedly. He noticed how nurses hid their own stress behind warm smiles. He noticed how children, even those too young to understand, sensed the fear in the adults around them. One morning, while delivering lunch trays, he met Noah, an 8-year-old with bright eyes and a cast covering both legs. Noah was in a wheelchair, coloring a picture of a fire truck. "Hi," Aiden said softly, setting down the tray. "Chicken nuggets today." Noah grinned, holding up his drawing. "Do you like it?" Aiden smiled genuinely. "Yeah, that's awesome." The boy tilted his head. "Why are you working here? You're a teenager." Aiden swallowed. Nobody had asked him that so directly. "I messed up," he said, voice low. "I drove recklessly. Someone got hurt because of me." Noah nodded, surprisingly calm. "My accident was 'cause someone was texting and driving. My mom says they didn't mean to hurt me, but it still happened." Aiden felt something snap inside him, a grief he didn't know he carried. "Yeah," he whispered. "I get that." Noah smiled again, simple and forgiving. "At least you're here helping." Aiden blinked rapidly, emotion burning behind his eyes. No one had said something like that to him before. Encouraging, honest, uncomplicated. That night, when he sat down to write his first letter to Ms. Harper, the words came slowly, clumsily. His handwriting was messy, his sentences uneven, but they were real. "Ms. Harper, I don't know what kind of person I was before all this, but I don't want to be him anymore." He rewrote the letter twice, then 3 times. By the end, his hand shook not from fear of consequences, but from something that frightened him far more. He actually cared about the words he was writing. The next part of his sentence, "Assistant crossing guard, began on a chilly Monday morning outside Lincoln Elementary." Aiden didn't wear designer sneakers this time. He wore a neon vest, a reflective cap, and held a stop sign taller than he was. Rain drizzled lightly. Cars crawled by. Parents eyed him from their windows with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Aiden stood stiffly on the curb, unsure what to do with himself. An older officer named Mr. DeLuca, the head crossing guard, approached him with a nod. "You nervous?" he asked. Aiden cleared his throat. "A little." "That's good," DeLuca said. "Means you're paying attention." He walked him through the basics. When to step forward, how to hold the sign, what to watch for, why eye contact with drivers mattered. Then DeLuca stepped back. "Your turn. Let's see what you've got." Aiden took a breath. A group of children approached, backpacks bouncing, chatting about cartoons and weekend plans. One little girl clutched her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Aiden recognized her immediately. Lily. Her mother saw him. Her expression tightened. She pulled Lily a little closer. Aiden froze. His heart thudded painfully. This was the child he had nearly killed. He forced himself to take a step forward, then another. He raised the stop sign and waited. Cars slowed. Aiden's breath trembled. He didn't look away. When it was safe, he nodded toward Lily and her mother. "You can cross now," he said, voice soft. Lily hesitated, then stepped forward. Aiden walked beside them, shielding them from the traffic with the large sign. When they made it safely to the other side, Lily's mother gave him a short nod, not gratitude, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. And somehow, that meant everything. Aiden spent weeks at the crosswalk. Rain or snow, hot days or freezing winds, he showed up. At first because he had to, then because he wanted to. Parents started greeting him. Children waved. Even the skeptical ones softened. Slowly, he stopped feeling like an intruder and started feeling like someone who belonged in a role of responsibility. One afternoon, after guiding dozens of children across, Aiden overheard 2 parents whispering, "That's the Brooks boy, right?" "Yeah, the one who almost hit the crossing guard. I didn't expect him to last a week. Well, look at him. He's really trying." Those 3 words, "he's really trying," tied something tight and aching inside Aiden's chest. He didn't know whether it was gratitude or guilt or hope, maybe all of it. That evening, he rode the bus home. He stared out the window, rain streaking the glass, the city blurring into lights and shadows. He remembered the arrogance he'd worn into the courtroom, the cruel smirk, the mocking laugh. He hated that boy. He wanted to bury him. Months passed. Aiden became reliable at the hospital. He showed up early, stayed late, read stories to children, cleaned equipment, learned how to change sheets without disturbing a recovering patient. He learned nurses' names. He learned children's stories. He learned to care. His letters to Ms. Harper grew longer, more honest, less guarded. She wrote back every time. Her letters were kind but firm, reminding him that forgiveness didn't erase consequences, but offered a chance to rise above them. Aiden folded each one carefully, storing them in a shoebox under his bed like a set of instructions for the person he was becoming. For the first time in his life, he felt something he'd never truly known. Pride. Earned pride. Not the kind that came from winning a tennis match, or buying expensive shoes, or flaunting social media followers, but the kind that came from doing something good for someone else, even when nobody was watching. His past still haunted him. But now, he was walking a different road, one he didn't deserve, but one he was determined to honor. Because every day, in the hospital, he saw children who would never walk again. Children who couldn't run, play, or dance because someone like him had thought they were invincible behind the wheel. Every day, he asked himself the same question: what if Lily hadn't made it? And the answer kept him moving, kept him working, kept him changing. He wasn't finished, not even close. But he was no longer the boy who had laughed in a judge's face. He was becoming someone new, someone better. And the hardest part of his journey was still ahead. By the time Aiden Brooks completed his 12 months of hospital service and his term as assistant crossing guard, the arrogance that once clung to him like a shadow had all but burned away. But there was still one final chapter, left on final test that would determine whether his transformation was real or simply a performance born from fear. He had to return to Courtroom 6. It had been 18 months since the day he stood in that room and mocked Judge Frank Caprio to his face. 18 months since he believed himself untouchable. 18 months since he nearly destroyed the life of a little girl and the woman who saved her. Now he stood in the courthouse lobby with his father and mother on either side. Their postures were different too. Jonathan Brooks no longer radiated the smug confidence of a powerful attorney. Melissa no longer hid behind designer pearls and an air of superiority. They were quieter, smaller, more aware of the world beyond their wealth. Aiden, his mother whispered, adjusting the collar of his simple dress shirt. "Are you ready?" He nodded, but the truth was, he wasn't. He was terrified, not of punishment, not of the law. He was terrified of disappointing the one person whose forgiveness had mattered most, Ms. Harper. "Let's go," Jonathan said softly. They walked together into Courtroom 6. The moment Aiden crossed the threshold, a wave of memory crashed over him, the smugness he'd worn that day, the cold dread that had replaced it, and the mercy that had followed. The room was full again. Reporters, parents, teachers. The same officer who had arrested him sat in the back, arms crossed but curious. Even some of the nurses from the hospital quietly filled the second row. Then Aiden saw them. Ms. Linda Harper, her hair shorter now, her shoulder healed but stiff. She sat with Lily Dawson in her lap. Lily, a year older, swung her legs gently and held a small stuffed rabbit, the same one she had dropped the day of the incident. Aiden's breath tightened. They were here, watching him. His throat closed with emotion. The bailiff called out, "All rise." A ripple of movement swept the room as Judge Frank Caprio entered with the same dignified presence as always. His silver hair seemed even whiter, his steps deliberate, but his eyes, those wise, steady eyes, held the same unshakable depth. As he took his seat, His gaze drifted across the room, then landed on Aiden. There was no anger, no judgment, just a quiet expectation, the kind that said, "Let's see who you've become." "You may be seated," Judge Caprio said. Everyone sat, except Aiden. He stood tall, hands clasped in front of him, his heart pounding. The clerk began reading the summary of his service. Over 1,000 hours worked at Providence Children's Hospital. Perfect attendance in victim impact programs. 3 months assisting the school crossing guard team. 12 reflective letters to Ms. Harper. 12 to Lily and her family. The judge listened without expression. But Aiden saw something in his eyes, something restrained, something waiting. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Caprio said, "step forward." Aiden approached the bench. "How old are you now?" 18, Your Honor. "And how do you feel today, standing here again?" Aiden swallowed, eyes glistening. "Grateful and ashamed, Your Honor. Grateful for the chance you gave me. Ashamed of who I was." The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Caprio studied him. "You served a year at the Children's Hospital. Tell me what that taught you." Aiden breathed in shakily. "That pain isn't abstract, that every reckless act has a face, a family, a story. I worked with kids who will never walk again, kids who lost siblings, kids who cry when they hear car horns. And I kept thinking, that could have been Lily. I almost made her one of them." He looked briefly toward Lily and Ms. Harper. "They deserved better," he said, voice breaking. "Everyone did." Judge Caprio nodded once. Then gently he asked, "And what did you learn from your time as a crossing guard?" Aiden's voice softened. "To pay attention, to care about people I didn't know, to understand that safety isn't automatic. It's earned by the choices we make." He exhaled slowly. "And I learned that trust takes time. Some parents wouldn't even look at me at first, but after a while, some began to say good morning. Some thanked me. Some just nodded. Those small things meant more than anything." Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Your letters to Ms. Harper were thoughtful, honest. I read every one, and Ms. Harper herself requested to speak today. Would you allow her to do so?" Aiden nodded quickly, almost desperately. Ms. Harper stood with effort and walked to the front of the courtroom. Lily clutched her hand. The judge invited her to speak. "Aiden," she said gently, her voice warm but steady. "I've read every letter you wrote. I didn't know what to expect at first, but I saw something in those pages, a softness I wasn't sure existed in you, a desire to understand, to grow, to be better." Aiden blinked rapidly, his vision blurring. "When someone hurts you," Miss Harper continued, "it's easy to hold on to anger, harder to hold on to hope. I chose hope, and you proved that hope wasn't wasted." She smiled softly. "I forgive you." Aiden broke. Tears spilled freely. His knees wobbled, but he stayed upright. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." Lily peeked out from behind Ms. Harper's leg. Her voice was small, but it carried clearly. "I'm glad you're helping kids now." Aiden's hand flew to his mouth as he choked back a sob. The courtroom was silent. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Judge Caprio let the moment settle before speaking. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "you stand before this court a very different young man than the one who entered 18 months ago. You have shown responsibility, humility, empathy, and growth. Those qualities are far more valuable to society than punishment alone." He paused. "And so, I will now issue your final ruling." Aiden straightened, breath quivering. "Your driving suspension will be lifted when you turn 21, provided you maintain a clean record until then." Aiden nodded repeatedly. "Your juvenile record will be sealed," the judge continued, "conditional on continued service in the community of your choosing." Aiden's lips parted in disbelief. "And the court formally recognizes your completion of the restorative justice program, with distinction." The entire courtroom erupted into soft applause, something exceedingly rare inside a court of law. Aiden's parents cried openly. Ms. Harper squeezed Lily's hand, but Judge Caprio wasn't finished. "Mr. Brooks," he said softly, "I am proud of you." Aiden broke again, this time not from guilt or fear, but from a kind of release he didn't know existed. Judge Caprio stepped down from the bench slow, deliberate, ceremonial. He approached Aiden, and the teenager instinctively straightened, afraid to move. The judge extended his hand. Aiden took it with both of his. "Redemption," the judge said, "is not a gift. It is a responsibility. Carry it with you. Every day." "I will," Aiden whispered. "I promise." A murmur of emotion swept through the room. "Good," Judge Caprio said, gently patting his shoulder. "Now go earn the rest of your life." Aiden nodded. "I will, Your Honor. I swear I will." As he turned to leave, the entire courtroom rose to its feet, not out of obligation, but out of respect for the long, painful, extraordinary journey that had unfolded before them. Aiden walked out of courtroom 6, no longer the boy who had once bragged, "You can't do anything to me." He was walking out as someone new, someone stronger, someone accountable, someone capable of change. And for the first time in his life, he was truly free. Sometimes the greatest punishment isn't confinement, it's being forced to confront the person you've become. And sometimes the greatest gift is the chance to become someone better. Aiden's story reminds us that accountability and compassion aren't opposites. Together, they are the path to true justice. Judge Caprio didn't just sentence a reckless teenager, he reshaped a life. And Ms. Harper's forgiveness proved something even more powerful, that mercy, when earned through effort and humility, can transform a heart more deeply than any cell or courtroom ever could. Now it's your turn. What does redemption mean to you? Have you ever been given a second chance that changed your life? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of justice, humanity, and hope.